Picture this moment when your carefully planned engagement party, complete with twinkling fairy lights strung across the backyard fence and the warm aroma of grilled burgers wafting through the air on a perfect summer evening in suburban Naperville, suddenly transforms into a stage for someone else's drama, leaving you and your fiancé Mark standing there with half-exchanged rings glinting under the oak tree you planted together just last year, while your younger sister Lauren struts forward with that infuriating smirk plastered on her face and announces her pregnancy to a crowd that erupts in cheers and applause, turning what was supposed to be your night of celebration into just another chapter in her endless quest for attention. I'm Emily Carter, 38 years old and a marketing consultant who's spent her career meticulously organizing campaigns that never veer off script, the kind of woman who thrives on stability after years of being the reliable big sister to Lauren. Always stepping in to help with her financial messes or emotional roller coasters, and now here we were on that June evening with our parents having flown in from Florida. Dad cracking his usual round of corny jokes about finally gaining a son-in-law who could handle a toolbox without calling a professional, and Mom fluttering around the floral centerpieces she'd insisted on arranging herself, because in her mind every detail mattered as if it were a royal affair rather than a simple backyard gathering for close family and friends. Mark and I had kept the engagement under wraps for a full year, savoring the secret like a private treasure amid our busy lives of work deadlines and weekend hikes through the nearby forest preserves. So when he finally slipped that simple gold band onto my finger during the toast under the big tree, the cheers that rose up felt like the culmination of everything we'd built together since meeting at a mutual friend's barbecue 5 years earlier. His steady presence a balm after my string of disappointing dates and career setbacks that had left me questioning if I'd ever find that partnership I craved. The playlist hummed with our favorite classic rock tunes from the 80s, the ones that reminded us of road trips and simpler times, and guests milled about with plastic cups of chilled white wine, sharing stories of their own engagements that made the evening feel warm and connected in that quintessential American way where backyard parties become impromptu family reunions. Lauren arrived fashionably late as she always did, breezing through the side gate in a flowing sundress that accentuated her carefree figure, her laughter slicing through the conversations like she carried an invisible spotlight wherever she went, a trait she'd honed since we were kids growing up in our modest ranch house on the outskirts of Chicago, where I was the one studying late for exams, and she was the one charming teachers out of extra credit with her quick wit and infectious smile. At 34, Lauren embodied the wild child archetype that our extended family often romanticized during holiday gatherings, bouncing from one adventure to the next, bartending at trendy spots one summer, dabbling in some half-baked social media influencing the next, while I built a life grounded in routines like morning jogs along Lake Michigan trails and quarterly reviews at the office, occasionally wiring her money for rent when her latest scheme fell through, but always expecting a thank you that rarely came without strings attached. The party reached its joyful peak with plates of homemade potato salad and fresh corn on the cob circulating among the guests, everyone toasting to our future with glasses raised high, when suddenly Lauren clinked her own glass with a fork, drawing all eyes to her as she stepped into the center of the circle formed around the fire pit, her posture radiating that familiar confidence that bordered on entitlement. "Hey, everyone," she began in that honeyed voice laced with mischief, pausing dramatically to let the anticipation build as if she were on a reality TV show scripted for maximum drama. "Since we're all here celebrating love and new beginnings tonight, I thought I'd add to the festivities with some news of my own," and then, with a hand placed gently but pointedly on her still flat abdomen, she declared, "I'm pregnant, due in the fall, and it's the most exciting thing that's happened to me in years." The reaction was instantaneous and overwhelming, a wave of gasps followed by enthusiastic applause rippling through the group as cousins and aunts rushed forward to envelop her in hugs, Mom letting out a squeal of delight that echoed off the neighboring fences while Dad's face lit up with the kind of grandfatherly pride he hadn't shown since my own college graduation years ago, everyone treating her revelation as the highlight of the evening without a second thought to how it eclipsed the very reason we'd gathered in the first place. Mark's hand tightened around my waist in a silent show of solidarity, his jaw clenching just enough for me to notice amid the chaos, while I stood there feeling the heat of embarrassment and fury rising in my chest like a slow-building storm. Because this wasn't the first time Lauren had pulled a stunt like this. Back at my promotion party 3 years earlier, she'd commandeered the conversation with tales of her latest European backpacking mishap, and during my college commencement, she'd turned up with a fresh tattoo and a breakup story that stole every photo op, but this instance cut deeper, striking at the heart of our engagement. The milestone we'd poured months of planning into with custom invitations featuring a candid photo of us laughing on a Florida beach during last winter's getaway, and invites that promised an intimate evening focused solely on us. As the night wore on with guests drifting between the dessert table laden with chocolate sheet cake and the makeshift dance area where a few couples swayed to the music, I forced smiles for the well-wishers asking about our wedding vision. All while Lauren held court near the patio, spinning animated stories about her surprise doctor's visit and the mysterious, amazing guy she'd met at a music festival last spring, dropping just enough vague details to keep the intrigue alive without committing to names or timelines that might pin her down. The crowd lapped it up, laughing at her quips and offering unsolicited advice on nursery themes as if her news were the real event, and when she finally sidled over to me during a lull, her eyes locking onto mine with that signature smirk that always carried a hint of triumph, she leaned in close and murmured, "Sorry," stole the spotlight again, as if it were all just harmless sibling banter, prompting chuckles from the nearby relatives who overheard and assumed it was some long-standing inside joke between us. But Mark and I exchanged a glance that spoke volumes, our shared disappointment hanging heavy in the air like the lingering smoke from the grill, because in that moment, it wasn't funny or cute, it was a blatant disregard for our boundaries. A reminder of how Lauren's need for validation often came at the expense of everyone else's moments, leaving me to wonder if family ties were worth the constant erosion of my own happiness. By the time the last guests filtered out into the cooling night, leaving behind a yard scattered with crumpled napkins and strands of confetti caught in the grass, Mark and I retreated to the quiet of our kitchen, pouring glasses of the leftover red wine as we processed the evening's twist. The elegant save-the-date cards we'd had printed weeks earlier now stacked on the counter like untouched evidence of our original plan, featuring our names intertwined with the spring wedding date and that beach photo symbolizing our easy partnership. "This can't stand," I said, the words emerging with a bitter edge honed from too many years of biting my tongue, and Mark nodded, his practical mind already shifting into problem-solving mode as we pulled out my laptop and began brainstorming revisions, transforming those innocent announcements into something with a sharper edge, a subtle but pointed message that would reclaim our narrative without descending into outright confrontation. We worked through the early hours, fingers tapping away until the design felt right, a rush order placed with the printer that would cost extra but promised to arrive in days. Our parents sending sleepy goodnight texts oblivious to the undercurrent, while Lauren no doubt uploaded her triumphant posts to Facebook, collecting likes from distant relatives and old friends who saw her as the family's vibrant spark. As dawn crept in with its soft light filtering through the curtains, Mark and I sat on the patio nursing fresh coffee, the revised save-the-dates digital proof glowing on my phone screen, when suddenly it buzzed insistently with an incoming call from Lauren, her name flashing like a warning, and when I answered expecting more smug commentary, her voice exploded through the speaker in a torrent of screams that made my blood run cold, demanding to know what we'd done and why we'd dared to fire back in such a way that promised to upend everything she thought she controlled. Lauren's scream pierced through the phone like a siren cutting through the quiet morning haze on our patio, where Mark and I sat with mugs of steaming coffee growing cold as we stared at the digital proof of our revised save-the-date cards on my laptop screen. The elegant cream-colored design now featuring our names prominently at the top alongside the spring wedding date, but with that subtle fine print edition at the bottom reading "No plus ones for spotlight stealers, family only," a phrase We'd crafted in the wee hours after the party to deliver a witty yet pointed reminder of her boundary-crossing antics without resorting to anything overtly hostile that might alarm our parents or distant relatives. At 38, I'd learned through years of navigating Lauren's dramatic flair that direct confrontation often backfired, turning her into an even bigger victim in the eyes of our family circle, so this approach felt like the perfect blend of humor and payback. A way to reclaim our narrative after she'd hijacked the engagement celebration with her pregnancy announcement that still left a bitter taste, despite the night having passed into this deceptively calm dawn. Mark's eyes widened as he leaned closer to hear her tirade, his hand reaching for mine in silent support while I held the phone away from my ear just enough to avoid the full volume of her fury. Her words tumbling out in a rush about how the card's wording was petty and jealous, accusing me of resenting her genuine milestone because my own life was all planned checklists and predictable routines rather than the spontaneous joys she claimed to embrace. Though we both knew her spontaneity, often translated to last-minute crises that pulled everyone else into her orbit. I kept my voice steady and laced with that dry sarcasm I'd honed from countless office meetings where I diffused tense client calls, responding to her outburst by saying that the invite was simply a lighthearted way to ensure our wedding day stayed focused on the couple getting married rather than any surprise diversions like the one she'd orchestrated so masterfully the night before, pointing out how her smirk and the crowd's laughter had made it clear she enjoyed the shift in attention even as Mark and I stood there exchanging rings under the oak tree with our hearts sinking. She fired back immediately, her tone shifting from rage to that manipulative hurt she wielded like a well-practiced weapon, insisting that pregnancy hormones made everything more intense and that I of all people should understand family support given how I'd always positioned myself as the responsible sibling who fixed her messes, from co-signing loans for her failed ventures to driving her to job interviews. After one too many bad breakups, but this time I wasn't backing down. Countering that support went both ways and didn't include derailing personal milestones with smirks and stolen spotlights that left the actual celebrants feeling like footnotes in someone else's story. Mark mouthed, "Put her on speaker," with a grin that suggested he wanted in on the exchange, and when I did, he chimed in calmly, agreeing that boundaries were healthy for everyone involved, especially with a baby on the way that would demand even more consideration from the family, his words landing like a gentle but firm anchor that momentarily silenced her before she hung up abruptly mid-sentence, muttering something indistinct about how we'd regret making her the villain in our little fairy tale. The immediate backlash rolled in faster than a summer thunderstorm over the Illinois plains, starting with Mom's call just as Mark and I were clearing the patio table and heading inside to start our day, her voice trembling with that familiar mix of worry and disapproval as she questioned the wisdom of including such a snarky line on official invitations that would reach cousins and aunts who already gossiped enough about our family dynamics during holiday potlucks. I explained over the kitchen counter, phone wedged between my shoulder and ear while slicing fruit for breakfast, that it was meant as a joke to diffuse the awkwardness from the party rather than let resentment fester unspoken. But Mom pressed on about Lauren's delicate state and how hormones could amplify every slight, urging me to apologize before things escalated into the kind of rift that had simmered between us sisters since our teenage years when I'd been the straight-A student and she'd been the cheerleader charming her way through detentions. Dad joined the conversation via a group text thread that lit up my phone like fireworks, attempting to mediate with his trademark olive branch emojis and a story about his own sibling squabbles from the 70s that always ended with a punchline about burying the hatchet over beers at a ballgame. But beneath his humor I sensed the underlying plea to keep the peace for the sake of future grandchildren and family photos that wouldn't look fractured on social media. Lauren, ever the strategist in her own chaotic way, took the matter public within hours, posting an Instagram story from her downtown apartment that showed a close-up of her hand resting on her belly with a soft filter glowing around the image. The caption reading, "Some families lift each other up through every milestone, while others draw lines in the sand. Here's to the joy ahead, no matter what. #BabyBump #family-vibes." A subtle shade that racked up likes and heart emojis from her network of Artsy acquaintances and old high school friends who commented with encouragements about positive energy and maternal glow, turning my private jab into fodder for their virtual support circle. My notifications exploded soon after with messages from concerned relatives who'd caught wind of the post, aunts texting about letting bygones be bygones, and uncles sharing memes of sibling rivalry that missed the mark entirely, leaving me to scroll through it all during my lunch break at the office where spreadsheets and client pitches suddenly felt like a welcome escape from the familial drama unfolding in real time. I chuckled bitterly to myself in the break room, the kind of laugh that masks deeper frustration, because while part of me recognized the pettiness in our revised invite, another part reveled in the small victory of not letting her rewrite our story unchallenged. Especially when Mark texted a thumbs-up emoji from his construction site, calling it a classy clapback that kept things from boiling over completely. Refusing to let the momentum slip entirely into her favor, I crafted my next countermove that evening after work. Settling into our home office with a glass of Pinot Grigio and the glow of the computer screen illuminating stacks of wedding catalogs we'd set aside in the wake of the party chaos. Deciding on a group email to the extended family list that started innocently enough with updates on venue confirmations and menu tastings for the big day, but wove in a casual postscript about appreciating tips for managing surprise elements at events after the recent backyard gathering had taken an unexpected turn. Attached to the email was a carefully cropped photo from the engagement party, one that captured Lauren's smirk in sharp focus with her hand dramatically posed on her stomach, while the background blurred just enough to keep the emphasis on her moment, ensuring that recipients would connect the dots without any explicit naming that could be called out as mean-spirited. It was a satisfying stroke of cleverness, the sort that felt empowering in its restraint, like flipping the script on her Instagram shade without stooping to passive-aggressive posts of my own, and when Mark reviewed it before I hit send, he high-fived me across the desk, dubbing it revenge with a side of wit that honored our commitment to handling conflict with the maturity she'd never quite mastered. Responses filtered in throughout the night and into the next morning, a mix of chuckling replies from cousins who added eye-rolling emojis and shared their own tales of family one-upmanship at weddings or birthdays, alongside Mom's voice note sighing about the need for everyone to act their age, but notably Lauren remained uncharacteristically silent for hours, her absence from the thread stretching into an uncomfortable void that had me checking my phone obsessively while folding laundry or prepping dinner, wondering if I'd pushed too far or if she was plotting something bigger in response. The evening unfolded into a routine of sorts, with Mark and I reviewing vendor emails for the wedding florals and catering to regain a sense of control amid the lingering tension, when suddenly the doorbell chimed insistently through the house, pulling me from the couch where I'd been half-watching a rerun of some 90s sitcom that promised light-hearted escapism. Peering through the peephole revealed Lauren standing on the porch uninvited, her expression a turbulent mix of storm clouds and red-rimmed eyes that suggested she'd been either crying or rehearsing a confrontation, and, before I could even unlatch the door, she pushed inside with the force of unresolved grievances, launching into an accusation about the email's photo being a low blow that exposed her vulnerability for sport, her words laced with a plea that hinted at layers beneath her usual bravado. As she paced the living room carpet we'd chosen together during a rare sister shopping trip years ago, her voice cracked on a revelation that stopped me cold, admitting that the baby's father wasn't the carefree artist she'd painted in her stories, but someone tied to our shared history in a way that could shatter the fragile peace we'd been clinging to, leaving the air thick with unspoken questions as she turned on her heel and stormed out into the night, the door clicking shut behind her like the snap of a trap waiting to spring. Lauren's abrupt departure left the living room feeling colder than the autumn chill seeping through the slightly ajar front door, where Mark returned from his grocery run just in time to find me standing amid the disarray of scattered wedding magazines and a half-empty wine glass on the coffee table, my mind reeling from her whispered bombshell about the baby's father being linked to our shared past in ways that hinted at secrets buried deeper than the casual sibling rivalries we'd always navigated with a mix of exasperation and reluctant affection. At 38, I'd prided myself on being the steady force in our family. The one who organized interventions after Lauren's string of impulsive decisions, like that time she eloped briefly to Vegas only to annul it months later amid tears and borrowed cash for the flight home. But now her words hung in the air like an unsolved puzzle from one of those true crime podcasts Mark and I binged on lazy Sundays, forcing me to question if my clever email jab and the revised save the dates had unearthed something far more volatile than mere attention-seeking. Something that could ripple through our parents' retirement bliss and the upcoming holiday gatherings where everyone pretended our differences were just colorful quirks rather than fractures waiting to widen. Mark set down the bags of fresh produce and pulled me into a hug on the couch, his practical nature kicking in as he suggested we sleep on it before jumping to conclusions, but sleep evaded me that night. My thoughts circling back to the hospital scare she'd mentioned in passing during her tirade, a detail that painted her not just as the dramatic sister, but as someone genuinely vulnerable beneath the smirks and social media facades, leaving me to wonder if my pursuit of witty revenge was starting to blur the line between justice and cruelty in a way that might make even our impartial aunt side against me when the full story inevitably surfaced at family brunches. The following morning brought the inevitable pull toward resolution, with Mom texting early to propose a neutral ground lunch at our favorite Italian bistro in Oak Park. The one with checkered tablecloths and bottomless bread baskets that had hosted countless ceasefires over the years, from childhood spats to adult disagreements about everything from holiday hosting duties to inheritance whispers after Grandma's passing. Dad agreed to drive in from his part-time consulting gig downtown, grumbling in his reply about the traffic on the Eisenhower, but underlying his complaint with that optimistic tone that always aimed to smooth ruffled feathers. While Lauren confirmed her attendance with a curt thumbs-up emoji that spoke volumes about her reluctance, yet necessity to hash things out before the family grapevine twisted the narrative further into something unrecognizable. We arrived separately to avoid any pre-meal ambushes, Mark opting to bow out gracefully with a work excuse that let me face this solo, and as I slid into the vinyl booth across from Mom's worried frown and Dad's forced smile, Lauren entered last with her usual flair, ordering a decaf herbal tea and placing her purse strategically to shield her midsection. Her eyes meeting mine briefly with a flicker of defiance, mixed with the exhaustion that came from carrying both a pregnancy and the weight of unspoken grudges. The server brought steaming plates of fettuccine alfredo and Capri salads drizzled in balsamic, the aromas temporarily masking the tension as Mom steered the conversation towards safer waters, like updates on her garden club triumphs and Dad's latest golf outing at the Senior League. But the undercurrent simmered until she finally broached the elephant in the room, twirling her fork as she lamented how the save-the-date phrasing and subsequent email had escalated what should have been a joyful overlap of milestones into unnecessary drama that risked alienating the very relatives whose attendance we all counted on for the events ahead. I defended my choices calmly over bites of garlic bread, explaining how Lauren's pregnancy reveal at the engagement party had felt like a deliberate eclipse of our moment, complete with that smirking apology that turned the crowd's laughter into salt in the wound, emphasizing that the invites were my attempt to set light-hearted boundaries rather than harbor outright resentment, especially given our history where her surprises often left me cleaning up the emotional debris, like after her abrupt moved to California 5 years back that ended in a cross-country bailout call at 2 a.m. Mom nodded sympathetically but countered that life's big announcements rarely followed a script, recounting her own experience of learning about Dad's job loss during what was supposed to be a romantic anniversary dinner in the 80s, suggesting that empathy for Lauren's hormonal state should take precedence over score settling, while Dad chimed in with an anecdote from his youth about his brother's wedding toast gone awry due to a surprise engagement ring reveal that ultimately became family legend rather than feud. Lauren picked at her salad greens throughout, her silence stretching until she leaned forward with a measured intensity, accusing me of weaponizing family channels to paint her as the selfish one when in reality my actions were born from a jealousy she claimed simmered beneath my polished exterior. The kind that envied her freedom to embrace unplanned joys while I micromanaged every detail from career ladders to wedding playlists. The exchange heated up then, with me retorting that freedom didn't excuse trampling over others' happiness, citing the backyard party's confetti-strewn aftermath where guests had lingered longer discussing her news than ours. But she parried with a sly promise of her own, mentioning offhand that the upcoming baby shower invitations would carry their own special notes, ensuring the focus stayed where it belonged, a counterjab that implied she'd weave my wedding into her narrative unless I backed off, her words laced with that competitive edge honed from years of vying for parental approval in our childhood home, where report cards and cheer trophies determined dinner table praise. The lunch concluded in a tentative armistice, with hugs exchanged in the parking lot under a sky-threatening rain that mirrored the unresolved clouds between us. Mom pressing a Tupperware of leftovers into my hands as a peace offering while Dad patted Lauren's back with grandfatherly caution about stress levels. But as we parted ways, she pulled me aside near my car, her whisper cutting through the lot's hum of idling engines to drop another tantalizing fragment about the pregnancy not aligning with the fairy tale image everyone assumed, hinting at complications tied to choices she'd made in desperation that could upend our family's carefully curated image of unity. Driving home through the winding streets lined with turning leaves, the uncertainty gnawed at me like an itch I couldn't scratch, blending my lingering anger with an unwelcome thread of concern that made me question the morality of my barbs, especially when Mark greeted me at the door with a knowing look and a reminder that family ties often demanded more grace than grudges, a perspective that might resonate with viewers navigating their own tangled kinships over backyard barbecues or Thanksgiving tables where old wounds resurfaced amid the turkey and pie. Yet Grace felt elusive in the face of her provocations, so I channeled the frustration into planning my next move over the following week, monitoring her social media posts about venue scouting for the baby shower at a trendy rooftop bar downtown that promised skyline views and craft mocktails. Details she shared with enthusiastic captions that masked any hint of the vulnerabilities she'd confessed during her unannounced visit. When the opportunity arose, I executed the sabotage with calculated subtlety, contacting the venue under an anonymous email disguised as a concerned relative who'd heard rumblings of past payment issues from Lauren's earlier event bookings, a recollection from when she'd stiffed a caterer during her short-lived event planning side hustle 2 summers prior, prompting the manager to place a verification hold that delayed confirmations and forced her to reshuffle plans amid frantic calls I imagined her making from her cluttered kitchen. Her frustration spilled into the family group chat later that evening, a rant about unreliable vendors and the stresses of impending motherhood that drew sympathetic responses from cousins and our aunt who offered to host instead, allowing me to reply with feigned innocence about how backyard alternatives might suit the intimate vibe better after our own recent gathering surprises, the satisfaction blooming quietly as I pictured her scrambling while I advanced my wedding preparations with calls to the florist for peony arrangements that evoked the romance she'd tried to overshadow. The cleverness of it all provided a momentary balm, a witty reclamation of agency in our ongoing tug-of-war, but that equilibrium shattered 2 days later during a routine afternoon at the office. My phone vibrating insistently with Mom's name on the caller ID, her voice laced with panic as she described Lauren's emergency room visit for a pregnancy complication attributed to dehydration and mounting stress. The news hitting like a cold wave that drowned any triumph and left me grabbing my keys with a flood of guilt, wondering if my machinations had tipped the scales toward real harm or if this was yet another layer in her elaborate game of emotional chess. The drive to Northwestern Memorial Hospital blurred into a tense haze of honking horns and flickering traffic lights along the congested Chicago streets, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached as waves of self-recrimination crashed over me for the anonymous tip that had derailed Lauren's baby shower plans. Wondering if that calculated act of revenge had amplified her stress to the point of this medical crisis, or if her hints about hidden complications were finally manifesting in ways that demanded accountability from all of us in the family rather than just another round of sibling score-settling that had defined our relationship since those awkward teenage years when she'd sabotage my study sessions with impromptu parties, and I'd retaliate by ratting her out to Mom over curfew violations. Mark had texted offers of support from his job site, but I waved him off with a quick reply about handling it alone for now, needing the solitude to process the guilt. Twisting in my gut like the overcooked pasta from our last family lunch, because while part of me still seethed over her engagement party hijack with that smirking pregnancy reveal amid the backyard fairy lights and half-exchanged rings, another part recognized the human fragility beneath her bravado, the same vulnerability that had surfaced when she showed up unannounced at my door spilling fragments about the baby's father being someone from our intertwined history that could upend the stable life I'd built with Mark through years of shared mortgages and weekend farmers market runs. Arriving at the emergency waiting area, I spotted Mom pacing the linoleum floor with a crumpled magazine in hand, her face etched with the kind of worry lines that deepened every time Lauren's impulsiveness led to these midnight calls, and Dad slouched in a plastic chair scrolling through his phone for distraction, both of them looking up with relief mixed with exhaustion as I approached and pulled them into a group hug that felt more like clinging to normalcy amid the beeping monitors and antiseptic smells that permeated the air. The doctor emerged after what felt like an eternity of small talk about the hospital's outdated coffee machine and updates on distant relatives' health scares, reassuring us with a professional nod that it was a false alarm stemming from severe dehydration exacerbated by stress, but that both mother and baby were stable following 4 fluids and rest. A verdict that unleashed a collective sigh as Lauren was wheeled out in a hospital gown, her complexion pale, but her faint smirk returning like an old habit when she locked eyes with me from the chair, suggesting that, even in vulnerability, she couldn't resist a touch of defiance that complicated my rush of relief with lingering suspicion about whether this episode was genuine or another ploy to recenter the narrative around her amid our escalating feud. We escorted her back to her cluttered walk-up apartment in Wicker Park, the one filled with mismatched furniture from thrift store hauls and stacks of unread self-help books on starting over that she'd collected during her various reinvention phases, where Mom immediately busied herself brewing chamomile tea and fluffing pillows on the sagging couch, while Dad rummaged through her fridge for something resembling a proper meal, their parental instincts kicking into overdrive as if this were just another in a long line of Lauren scrapes from college keggers to that ill-fated art gallery job that ended in eviction threats. Lauren waved off the fuss at first, but then pulled me into the narrow kitchen away from their hovering, the steam from the kettle rising between us as she whispered accusations about how my venue sabotage had directly contributed to her collapse, her voice cracking with a rawness that pierced through the armor of my justifications, forcing me to confront the possibility that my witty countermeasures were no longer playful jabs, but active harms in a rivalry that had outgrown the backyard barbecues and holiday toasts of our youth. In that moment, standing amid the clutter of mismatched mugs and takeout containers that spoke to her perpetual state of flux, I felt the weight of potential villainy settling on my shoulders, the kind that might make impartial observers like our book club friends or Mark's poker buddies shake their heads and advise dialing back the pettiness before it poisoned the well of family support we all drew from during life's bigger storms like job losses or health scares. Yet her words only fueled a defensive spark as I countered that her initial spotlight theft at the engagement party had ignited this chain reaction, complete with the crowd's laughter echoing in my ears like a mocking chorus, while Mark and I stood sidelined in our own celebration. She leaned against the counter then, hand instinctively cradling her abdomen, and dropped the bombshell with casual brutality, revealing that the father wasn't some nomadic artist from a festival fling as she'd spun in her Instagram tales, but Jake, my former coworker from the marketing firm 5 years back, the charismatic sales rep who'd shared awkward coffee breaks and harmless flirtations before I met Mark and settled into a rhythm of date nights at cozy bistros and joint tax filings. The name landed like a punch to the solar plexus, drudging up memories of office happy hours where Jake's easy charm had briefly tempted me during a dry spell. now twisted into this intimate betrayal that linked our paths in a way that felt both absurdly coincidental and deliberately invasive. Her eyes searching my face for shock or jealousy, as if this disclosure were her ultimate equalizer in our contest for emotional high ground. "Why spring this now?" I managed, my voice steady despite the whirlwind in my chest, and she shrugged with that flickering smirk, claiming it was inevitable gossip fodder in our tight-knit circle where ex-colleagues turned up at weddings and bar mitzvahs, assuring me that my pristine wedding plans remained untouched by the mess she'd waded into alone since Jake had made it clear he wanted no part in fatherhood or the complications it entailed. The revelation simmered through the following weeks like a low boil, infusing family dinners at our parents' Florida condo during a quick visit with undercurrents of unease, where Mom's attempts at unity through baby name brainstorming sessions clashed with Lauren's coy ultrasound shares on the group chat that subtly shaded my bridal preparations with captions about embracing the unplanned amid the perfectly scripted. Her posts drawing empathetic comments from aunts who'd weathered their own surprise pregnancies in the 70s and now viewed her as the resilient underdog. I confided the details to Mark during late-night talks on our deck overlooking the neighborhood fireflies, his advice centering on forgiveness as the path to inner peace rather than the corrosive hold of grudges that could taint our honeymoon visions of beach walks and sunset dinners, but letting go seemed like capitulation to her pattern of intrusion. So I plotted a counterstrike with the precision of a marketing campaign rollout, volunteering to assist with her rescheduled baby shower at our parents' spacious backyard to gain insider access before quietly inviting a handful of Jake's old work acquaintances under the guise of expanded guest lists, ensuring their presence would spark inevitable questions about his involvement that she'd have to navigate without my direct intervention. The shower unfolded under blue skies with pastel balloons bobbing in the breeze and a table groaning under fruit platters and quiches that Mom had slaved over, guests cooing over gift bags while Lauren opened packages of tiny onesies and bottles with practiced grace. But the real drama ignited when Jake's buddies arrived bearing wrapped boxes and casual inquiries about how the proud dad was faring, their probing turning her composed facade into a mask of deflection as she laughed off the topic with vague mentions of single motherhood's empowerment, the scene providing me a hidden thrill from my vantage point by the punch bowl where I suppressed a grin at the elegant unraveling of her carefully curated image. It was revenge wrapped in civility, a satisfying nod to the balance she'd disrupted at my engagement gathering, yet the moral quandaries mounted as our wedding date loomed just 2 months away. Vendors confirming intricate details like string quartet selections and custom cake tiers that now carried the shadow of unresolved tensions, making every sample tasting feel laced with the bitterness of family discord. Lauren reached out unexpectedly one crisp evening via text, proposing a truce over coffee at the corner cafe near my office, where we'd shared childhood secrets over hot chocolates decades ago, and though skepticism gnawed at me, I agreed. Arriving to find her nursing a decaf latte with a glow that softened her features, her hands fidgeting with the paper napkin as she affirmed her commitment to keeping the baby regardless of Jake's absence and hinted at needing my support in the months ahead for practicalities like daycare scouting or late-night advice sessions. The conversation flowed into tentative common ground, touching on memories of our grandmother's wisdom about sisterhood enduring beyond squabbles, but then she lowered her voice amid the cafe's murmur of laptops and espresso machines, alluding to deeper layers in the pregnancy story tied to echoes from our past that involved choices made in shadows we'd both pretended to forget, a cryptic thread that piqued my curiosity just as her phone buzzed with an urgent notification, prompting her to gather her things and flee with apologies hanging in the air, leaving me to cover the tab and drive home through rush-hour traffic with my mind abuzz. As preparations for the wedding intensified with fittings for my gown and rehearsals for the ceremony at the country club overlooking the rolling greens where Mark and I had first discussed forever, the fragile peace shattered on the morning of the big day when my phone illuminated with a voicemail from Lauren, her voice fractured with desperation as She begged me to pause the proceedings and listen to a truth that could redefine everything we'd fought over, her plea echoing in the bridal suite's vanity mirror reflections as guests began arriving outside. That desperate voicemail from Lauren reverberated in my mind like an uninvited guest crashing the bridal suite's serene atmosphere on the morning of our wedding day at the upscale country club perched on the rolling hills outside Naperville, where sunlight streamed through the lace-curtained windows casting golden patterns on the vanity mirror as I adjusted the delicate veil that Mark and I had chosen during a rainy afternoon shopping trip in the city, the fabric whispering against my shoulders, while bridesmaids bustled about with hairpins and lipstick touch-ups, their chatter a comforting hum that momentarily drowned out the turmoil stirred by her fractured plea to halt the ceremony and absorb a truth that promised to upend the fragile equilibrium we'd clawed toward through months of barbed emails, venue sabotages, and half-confessed secrets about the baby's origins tied to figures from our overlapping pasts like Jake and whatever deeper shadows she kept alluding to in her cryptic whispers. At 38, standing there in the fitted gown of ivory silk that hugged the curves I'd toned through pre-wedding yoga sessions at the local studio where neighborhood moms swapped stories of their own marital milestones, I felt the weight of potential regret pressing down heavier than the heirloom pearl necklace Mom had lent me from her own 1970s wedding. Because ignoring Lauren's call seemed like the ultimate assertion of my agency after her engagement party takeover without smirking pregnancy announcement amid the backyard fairy lights and communal laughter that had left Mark and me as mere spectators in our own joy, yet part of me, the big sister who'd bandaged her scraped knees and covered her rent during lean times, wondered if this final interruption was a genuine cry for help or just her last-ditch effort to eclipse the vows I dreamed of exchanging under the club's grand oak archway with Mark, his steady gaze and quiet humor having anchored me through infertility, consultations and career pivots that tested our bond long before sibling drama entered the fray. Deleting the message with a decisive swipe, I turned to the mirror and forced a smile for the photos, telling myself that family obligations couldn't derail the life we were building brick by brick, from shared home renovations to weekend escapes at Lake Michigan cabins. A choice that might strike viewers as cold-hearted amid their own tales of fractured kinships resolved or regretted at altars and anniversaries, but in that charged hush before the music swelled, it felt like the only path to reclaiming the narrative she'd stolen so many times over. The ceremony proceeded with the precision of a well-rehearsed play under the expansive white tent draped in tulle and fresh peonies that evoked the romantic whimsy of those old Hollywood films Mark and I adored watching on streaming nights curled up with popcorn. Guests filling the rows of white folding chairs that overlooked the manicured greens where golfers paused their games to applaud from afar, the air scented with blooming lilacs and the faint earthiness of dew-kissed turf as the string quartet struck up our selected melody from the 90s rom-com soundtrack that symbolized our easy partnership forged in mutual friends' barbecues and late-night strategy sessions over takeout Chinese. Vows flowed from the officiant's warm baritone, Mark's voice steady as he promised enduring support through whatever storms life hurled our way, his words laced with personal touches about our first awkward dance at a company gala and the quiet strength we'd drawn from each other during those private fertility clinic visits 2 years prior that ended in heartache but deepened our resolve, the exchange culminating in rings sliding into place amid applause that swelled like a tide, sealing our union in a moment of pure, unadulterated focus that Lauren's antics couldn't touch from her seat at the back where I'd spotted her slipping in late, her loose maternity dress concealing the bump that had become the axis of our conflict. Cocktail hour buzzed with clinking glasses of champagne flutes and passed hors d'oeuvres of mini crab cakes and stuffed mushrooms that guests savored while sharing anecdotes of their own weddings, from elopements in Vegas to lavish affairs in the Hamptons. The energy light and celebratory as Mark and I circulated arm in arm, fielding toasts from uncles about finally making an honest man of him and cousins teasing about the cake-cutting tradition that awaited, all of it weaving a tapestry of communal joy that momentarily erased the undercurrents of resentment I'd harbored since her hospital scare and the Jake revelation that had twisted our sibling bond into something unrecognizably fraught. Yet the respite proved fleeting as the reception kicked into gear with the band's lively swing set drawing couples to the polished dance floor under chandeliers that twinkled like captured stars. The buffet line forming for carved tenderloin and herb-roasted vegetables that filled the air with savory warmth, while laughter echoed off the ballroom's paneled walls. But Lauren materialized during the bouquet toss near the mahogany bar where single guests clustered with mock anticipation, her grip on my arm firm and unyielding as she pulled me into a shadowed alcove away from the revelry, her eyes blazing with a mix of desperation and resolve that stripped away the smirk she'd wielded like armor throughout our feud. "You deleted my message," she hissed over the upbeat croon of the vocalist covering a classic Motown hit, her breath quick and shallow as if the words had been bottled up through the drive from her apartment where she'd likely paced in solitude. "But you need to hear this before you lock it all away in your perfect little world. The pregnancy isn't Jake's, like I said to rattle you. It's from that fertility clinic 2 years ago, the one you and Mark visited during your treatments before giving up hope, and they mixed up the files, calling me by mistake because our names were too similar in the system, thinking I was the patient inquiring. So I went through with the procedure using your selected donor profile, turning your discarded chance into my reality." The confession crashed over me like a rogue wave at the lakeshore we frequented for picnics, pieces snapping into place with brutal clarity, her evasive hints during coffee meetups and hospital whispers, the suspiciously aligned timeline with our clinic consultations that we'd kept buried like a private grief amid family small talk about grandkids and retirement plans. Her envy of my stability manifesting not just in spotlight grabs, but in this profound appropriation of a future we'd mourned in tear-streaked nights and therapy sessions that cost more than we could afford. I recoiled, the bouquet's satin ribbons tangling in my fingers as anger surged hot and unfiltered, demanding how she could hijack something so intimately ours. A stolen seed of possibility that twisted her pregnancy from mere inconvenience into a violation of the core vulnerabilities we'd shielded from even our closest friends. Her shrug carrying a defiant edge as she justified it by claiming my life overflowed with securities like Mark's unwavering partnership and our cozy home with its herb garden and framed travel photos, while hers teetered on the brink of evictions and fleeting romances, framing the act as poetic justice for the times I'd played reluctant savior without acknowledging her isolation in a city that chewed up dreamers like her. The audacity ignited a firestorm in my chest, words rising sharp about betrayal transcending sibling rivalry into ethical quicksand that could drown any remnant of trust we'd clung to through childhood secrets and adult apologies. But before the argument could escalate into shouts that would draw unwanted eyes from the dance floor, Mom appeared with her signature timing, oblivious to the undercurrent as she herded us toward the photo booth setup with its vintage props and Polaroid flashes, fracturing the confrontation into posed smiles and forced embraces that masked the chasm widening between us. The reception marched on through cake cuttings with its 3 tiers of vanilla sponge and buttercream roses that we'd taste-tested during a sun-drenched afternoon at the bakery. Toasts from best man recounting Mark's proposal on a snowy hike through the Indiana dunes where he'd knelt amid whispering pines, each element reinforcing the day's triumph even as Lauren's revelation festered like an untreated wound, prompting stolen glances across the tables where she mingled with subdued poise, her hand occasionally drifting to her belly in a gesture that now carried layers of intrusion. As the evening wound toward its close with guests departing under a canopy of stars visible through the open terrace doors, carrying home favors of monogrammed cookies and well wishes for our future, I slipped away to the quiet patio overlooking the darkened course, the cool night air a balm against the flush of unresolved fury, and dialed Lauren's number with fingers steady from the resolve that had carried me down the aisle, my voice emerging cold and measured when she answered from the venue's lounge where family lingered over coffee. "We're through," I stated without preamble, outlining the boundaries that would exclude her from our holidays and milestones until she confronted the depth of her choices, the finality landing with the weight of a door closing on decades of enmeshed lives. Her response dissolving into sobs interspersed with halting apologies that echoed the vulnerability she'd glimpsed during her unannounced visit, but now rang hollow against the betrayal scale. Hours later, as Mark and I loaded suitcases into the car for our drive to the honeymoon suite at a lakeside resort where we'd planned lazy mornings and trail walks without cell service interruptions, her follow-up call came through the Bluetooth. Her voice a fractured whisper trailing off into silence after a simple "I'm sorry" that hung unanswered in the cabin's confines, leaving the road ahead stretching into ambiguity. Had the clinic error been real or one last fabrication to fracture my joy? And could forgiveness ever bridge the gulf she'd carved? Or would this mark the permanent unraveling of threads that bound us through bloodlines and buried pains, prompting endless reflections on loyalty's cost in families where spotlights and secrets forever intertwined?